Hello. Welcome to the January-February 2024 edition of Champion Brief's video topic analysis. I'm Daniel Shatzkin, the editor-in-chief of Champion Brief's Lincoln Douglas brief, and today I'm here to discuss the topic resolved. The United States ought to substantially reduce its military presence in the West Asia and North Africa region. This topic is both fascinating and controversial. It is an important topic that we should discuss as both a Lincoln Douglas community, but also a country, and how our military power is best used around the world. I recognize, though, that this topic carries with it a lot of controversy, so much so that many school districts have decided to not debate this topic entirely. Uh, and that is a respectful decision. There is a lot of personal issues tied up within this topic, and it can be very difficult for schools to also debate this topic with some of the laws that are in place that require specific doctrines of education that this topic may go against. So, I guess let's start with the idea of what is military presence before we get into the more controversial areas of this topic. So, what is military presence? Uh, the gut reaction and what most definitions will tell you is the basic form of military presence is what would be the boots on the ground form of military presence, i.e., bases, troops, things like that. So there had to be a actual physical presence within a country for that type of presence. Then there is a more detached form of military presence. Usually it's types of advisors. There's still boots on the ground, but it's much less of a commitment by the United States. Uh, and then there is also what we would call an offshore presence. So we have aircraft carriers, submarines, um, destroyers, cruisers, the submarines, destroyers, and cruisers all launch cruise missiles that are land attack cruise missiles. So they can attack the shore from the offshore region. So we would be talking on this topic about the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, the Arabian Gulf, the Persian Gulf, those areas, all around kind of the oceans of the countries that we're talking about, because just because we don't have boots on the ground doesn't mean we can't affect those countries through other forms of regional military presence. And we'll get onto that regional question in a second. But then there's also what we would call kind of a pseudo military presence that the United States has in many countries without having boots on the ground, similar to kind of military advisors and trainees, but without even having personnel there. And the way that we do that is we sell arms to a lot of countries. Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, the UAE, are just a few of the countries within the region, to name a few, that we do sell arms to. Egypt also is there, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other territories in a second. But there are a lot of U.S. arms sales within the region, and we generally condition those arms sales on abiding by U.S. policies and stuff like that. It's a form of soft power. Um, I apologize, I'm dealing with a little bit of a head cold here. But it's a form of soft power that the US uses to influence other countries. We'll say, hey, you can get F-16s if you do this, or you can join the F-35 program and get super awesome stealth fighters if you do this, or we're going to boost your naval capabilities so that you can help fight piracy. So we've done all sorts of different things within the region to kind of help out countries boost their own military capabilities, but in order to help our own foreign policy, international relations goals. So, where is the WANA or West Asia, North Africa region? Within North Africa, it would encompass the countries generally thought to be Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, and Sudan, as well as territories controlled by Portugal, Spain, and Italy. There's also some arguments for countries like Somalia to be included within this debate because of how close regionally Somalia is to countries like Yemen and some other West Asian nations and the effect that US policy regionally has on Somalia. But that's a separate debate. And topically, I think there's a justification for anti piracy stuff, which we'll get into later, that would affect Somalia without directly addressing Somalia on the topic. So we can talk about that a little bit more in a bit. The West Asia region is the one where most of the hot spots on this topic are, and the ones where a lot of the sensitivity is. Starting with Armenia and Azerbaijan, which are currently like in pseudo conflict. They kind of go back and forth over a region that they've been fighting on, and they are backed on different sides by Turkey and Russia, and the United States is starting to get involved in backing the side that was formerly backed by Russia. It's a very complicated situation, and it is one in which the United States is starting to dip its toe in the waters. So you can start talking about that topic there. Then there's Bahrain, where the United States has a large military base. It's the home of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Uh, there is Cyprus, which is a territory that is generally a site of or a flashpoint of conflict between Turkey and the European country Greece. Turkey fits both in West Asia and in Europe, since it stretches across both continents there. And then you have Georgia, which has been in conflict with Russia on and off, and the U.S. has backed Georgia in that conflict. You have Iraq, which the U.S. obviously invaded in 2003 and has been engaged in conflict against ISIS in Iraq in recent years. Then you have Jordan, which the U.S. has strong military ties to. We sell a lot of arms to. Kuwait, again, another country who we've sold arms to. And we also came to the defense of Kuwait in the first Gulf War, but that was mainly to protect Kuwaiti oil and oil sales within the region. There's Lebanon, a country controlled by Hezbollah, and one which the U.S. has a kind of antagonistic relationship with. Oman, the Qataris, who the U.S. have a friendly relationship with, we sell arms with, and they are our chief negotiators, kind of, in the Israel, United States, Palestinian, Hamas kind of negotiations that are going on. A lot of that is going through the Qatari people. Then there's Saudi Arabia. We sell a lot of arms to the Saudi government. And we had previously backed the Saudi government's war against the Houthi people, the Houthi rebels in Yemen. We have slowly backed away from that, yet we continue to back the Saudi Arabian military, sell Saudi Arabia arms. There's Syria, where the U.S. is currently engaged in conflicts against both uh, the remnants of ISIS, as well as at times the government of Bashar al-Assad, while backing various groups, pro-democracy groups and Kurdish groups within the region. Then there's Turkey, a country the U.S. has significant military ties to, but also an incredibly complicated relationship with. And that is another country which, debaters can focus on and have a very interesting debate. Then you have the United Arab Emirates. The UAE, again, is another country the US sells arms to. We've sold F-15s to them. We've sold fighter jets. We've sold missiles. We've sold offshore patrol ships. Then there's Yemen, again, the country I mentioned before with Saudi Arabia. And Yemen has been in a state of civil war where their leader basically fled to Saudi Arabia, asked for Saudi Arabia's help to fight against this Houthi rebel group, and it's functionally now controlled by the Houthis. The Houthis are kind of the legitimate power within the region. They function as the legitimate power in Yemen, and so there is somewhat of a peace process that is trying to be pushed right now between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but Yemen and the Houthi leadership has been launching attacks on shipping within the Red Sea ever since the war between Israel and Hamas have started. And that has increased tensions within the region and has caused an increased military presence within the Red Sea and the Mediterranean in order to try and stop some of these attacks. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is Israel and the Palestinian territories. Um, let's just get right to that, I guess. And October 7th was a terrorist attack. There is no other way that that can be described. It was a brutal assault on innocent civilians. It was teenagers at music festivals. It was women and children. It was little babies being slaughtered. It was the elderly being slaughtered. It was civilians being taken captive. There is no other way to describe October 7th other than a terrorist attack. Plain and simple. If you try and justify the attacks of October 7th, you are justifying terrorism. That being said, there are many debates that can be had over the topic of Israel and Palestine and the US role within it. Importantly, the debates that we are having should focus on that US role. We can debate Israel's response to the terrorist attacks, just like in this country where we debated the response to 9/11 and whether or not we should have gone to full-scale war in Afghanistan and whether or not the war in Iraq was truly justified, because remember, 9/11 was a somewhat justification for the war in Iraq, even though it really didn't hold up. It was used. We can debate those things. We can debate how you respond to a terrorist attack. And you can look at it on a humanitarian angle. Well, I don't necessarily believe all the numbers that come out of the Palestinian territories. Independent analysis, satellite analysis shows that in areas like Gaza City, 65 to 75% of the livable structures have been destroyed. There are going to be civilian casualties in that. Why are there civilian casualties? Well, first, Hamas builds tunnels that they move their troops in right under these civilian locations. They had a large base under a hospital. Hamas is known to use these locations as launching points because they're hoping for two things. One, either Israel doesn't retaliate because Israel doesn't want to commit a humanitarian error. Or two, Israel does attack, civilians get killed, and they get to then use it as a PR tactic to say, look, Israel is attacking civilians. That's what happens when you are using people as human shields. So Israel is kind of stuck in how they are going to respond. And while they are trying to limit civilian casualties, it's very hard to do so when the side you're fighting doesn't care about the civilians that they're supposedly in charge of. Hamas was democratically elected and then canceled all further elections. Hamas is not a very popular group in the Palestinian territories, but Hamas is the power. And so they've gotten legitimacy through power and threats of violence. It's very hard to speak out against them. And so it's understandable that people see this in Israel's response as collective punishment. But it also needs to be seen as Hamas's tactic. Hamas wants Israel to have no choice but to make these types of decisions to bomb close to civilian infrastructure in order to take them out. Long term, well, short term, They may succeed in taking out Hamas. Long term, though, Hamas's strategy is one that is like the Hydra. And if you cut off one head, in this case, Hamas, another one will just grow back. And the way that Hamas has set up this war to go is that Israel really has no choice but to do these types of actions or let Hamas get away with a heinous, terrible terrorist attack. And both are bad choices. Long-term security wise, the actions that Israel is taking debatably can be said to be creating the next generation of terrorists. Every study on terrorism and why people join terrorist organizations says it's out of desperation and out of conditions that create a feeling of hopelessness. And when you look at what's going on with the generation of Palestinian children who are losing family members and limbs, I can't help but think that that next generation of hopelessness that can be preyed upon by people trying to get vulnerable people to do horrible things will happen. And that's where these debates can center. What is the future of security going to be in the region? How can the US continue to arm Israel if every time these things happen, Israel just recreates the conditions potentially for future terrorism? This isn't to say Israel doesn't have a right to exist or that the Palestinian people don't have a right to statehood. In fact, those are debates that shouldn't ever happen. Saying that the Palestinian people don't have a right to self-determination is wrong. Saying that Israel shouldn't exist is wrong. Those debates should never occur, and those arguments shouldn't happen. At this point, Israel has been around for 75 plus years. It is 3 to 4 generations of people who have lived and called themselves Israeli. It is naive at best and anti-Semitic at the most genuine of how that argument is played when people use phrases that talk about wiping out Israel and erasing Israel. And in the same way, it is Islamophobic when we conflate all people of the Palestinians to Hamas and the terrorist tactics of Hamas. The Palestinian people are deserving of justice, just as the Israeli people are deserving of security. And focusing on how the US plays its role in arming the Israeli government and continuing to arm them and maybe not necessarily always promoting peace is a reasonable debate that can be had. How does the US continue to influence the peace process in the region? What is the peace process going forward? Why do these things keep happening and how do we get them to a point where they stop? That doesn't mean we don't look at past injustices. We have to understand them on both sides of how they occurred. But when we as a debate community only focus on the past injustice and not look at how we can then move forward and provide security and justice for all people within that region, we're doing not only ourselves a disservice, but we're doing the future a disservice. We can start coming up with some of these solutions and really hashing it out in a controlled environment. But that can only happen if both sides of a debate are respectful to each other and listen to each other and have arguments based on a mutual hope for solving the problem and not wiping each other out. And unfortunately, that's how it's felt for a while. And maybe as a debate community, we can shift that conversation towards solving the future instead of relitigating the past. Um, that's about all I'm going to say on the topic of Israel and Palestine. in this current conflict between Israel and Hamas. Um, it is an incredibly controversial issue. It is an incredibly personal issue. And I would suggest before having debates centered around that topic to first ask all of the participants in the round, the judge, your opponent, if they are comfortable with discussions on that topic. And if they are not, to have a backup case, to not make that your A strat. That can be a B strat or a C strat in rounds where everybody feels comfortable having the discussions, but don't make it the strategy that you want to go for every single round. Moving on, there are a lot of other hot spots within this topic. This topic is going to be a mainly utilitarian debate, but it doesn't mean that there aren't philosophical issues that can't be addressed or discussed. Concepts such as sovereignty are going to be big issues on the negative, or rather on the affirmative. On the negative, you're going to be focused a lot more on the utilitarian debate. But then there's also this debate between imperialism and colonialism. And a lot of people use the words interchangeably. They are not the same thing. They aren't mutually exclusive. Imperialism and colonialism often go hand in hand, but imperialism doesn't need to exist with colonialism. They can be separate entities. And in the modern day, we often see more empire or the use of military force to influence other people to do what we want and to bring the resources towards us. Instead of colonialism, which was the actual settlement of people in order to then take the goods from a land and bring it back to the center of the empire. When I say us, I mean the United States because I'm an American citizen. And so when we talk about American empire, it does come back all to us in some sense. And so the idea of American empire or American imperialism is that we use our military to make other countries more like us or do our own bidding. So we use our military power to protect Saudi Arabia so we can get oil. We used our military power in the first Gulf War to protect Kuwaiti oil so we could keep that oil. There are arguments that in 2003 we invaded Iraq solely for Iraqi oil. Um, these are legitimate arguments about our motivations behind why the United States has such a massive military presence, not just within the WANA region, but around the world. And so arguing that, you know, the United States is trying to influence the region through its military are really solid. Some of the arguments about colonialism are less so. And so I think you should focus your arguments more on the empire aspect of the United States and how we use our military to kind of force other peoples to do our bidding, than, the colonialism aspect. There's also the sovereignty aspect. How does influence via, military presence affect the sovereignty of other countries and the decision making of other countries? And should the U.S. really have the power to do that? Um, I think in a world where no country tried to assert its influence on other countries, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing if the U.S. pulled back. But if the US does pull back its influence on other countries, what happens to that vacuum in the real world? Who fills into the US influence? That will be a very big negative argument that occurs is how does Russia and China fill in if the US pulls out with some of their influence? There will be discussions again about Yemen, the Houthis with the rockets that they are currently shooting. And then there will be large discussions about US maritime presence. Arguably, the US has a larger maritime presence in the region than a boots on the ground presence in the region. Although the USS Gerald Ford left the region as I am recording this, It's pulling out of the Mediterranean. There is still a sizable U.S. military presence in the Mediterranean Sea and in the Red Sea, both of which cover the region that we are discussing. Um, including aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, all sorts of power projection tools that the US uses in the region to not only deter piracy, but also potentially deter Iran from directly attacking Israel and some other stuff that's going on within the region. So there's a lot of tension there that can be addressed with US presence and whether or not US presence is providing beneficial I guess security in the region or if the US is actually destabilizing the region. And admittedly, a lot of the authors that would say the US is destabilizing the region are generally the people from the countries that don't like the United States or represent that theory. There are some US theorists and Western theorists that say that the US should pull back, but a lot of them say that the US presence in the region is a good thing too. And so there's going to be a lot of those debates. Then there's a debate over whose idea of presence we should talk about. Um, people in Iraq view U.S. military presence very different than we do. In areas where the United States has used things like depleted uranium bullets, they look at the remnants of those shells as a continuing form of U.S. military presence. There are a lot of subtle ways that the US provides military presence. There are ways that the US provides military presence without ever setting foot in a region. There's a lot of historical animosity to the United States within the region due to meddling that the United States did during the Cold War when we tried to limit Soviet influence within that area. And so US presence can be viewed detrimentally in a lot of these countries, and that should be weighed importantly. Finally, there are also foreign nations that have territories within that region that are not countries within that region. Portugal, Spain, and Italy are also regional security or regional powers functionally. They are large European countries with large navies, fairly large armies, large air forces. Portugal less so than Spain and Italy. Spain and Italy are really the bigger military powers of the three. But still, they all maintain a military presence within the region. And if the United States pulls out of the region, what is their response going to be? Will Spain increase patrols? Will Italy increase patrols? Will that counteract some of the US pulling out because it's still Western influence within that region? There's still NATO powers. Um, and so that also makes a big influence. Remember, these piracy and shipping protections have been going on within the region prior to October 7th. Somalia was first attacking within the Red Sea and sailing out into the Bab el-Mandeb, which is part of that region. It's between North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and West Asia within, why am I blanking on the country? Uh, right along the southern tip. It's like Qatar or Oman, um, one of those countries. It's Qatar, Oman, or Bahrain that are all like right down, settle right in the like Red Sea, Indian Ocean uh area that would be debated about and the piracy within that region. Especially off of Yemen nowadays. So those are big issues that we can discuss. And then there are also just the idea of, generally speaking, does US presence do good for the United States? Do we need to pivot away from the Middle East? Uh, and are there more important areas for the United States military to focus on right now? Can the US continue to support actions within the Middle East. All of these are legitimate arguments that need to be discussed as the future of U.S. military power is uh, one that is kind of up in the air right now. We have decreased shipbuilding capacity, we have decreased recruitment, decreased readiness from our fighter jets. So all of these things are weighing on how the U.S. can deploy its troops at the moment, and will be an important part of the debate going forward that we should look at. Um, and finally, I just want to say that the predominant religion within the region is Islam. And we often in this country have a issue of conflating the religion with the extremists and the terrorists who use the religion as a way to manipulate people. And they take extreme views of that religion. Most of the people in this region are not extremists. They are not terrorists. They are everyday people who just practice the Islamic religion. And we cannot conflate violence that has once occurred in this country to all people who have practiced that religion. And the Islamophobia that often comes up when talking about these topics is incredibly telling. Uh, there is a view that the United States is superior to the countries in this region, or whatever it may be. And that is not true. The United States has a large military. What that gives us is the ability to exert our influence around the world. It doesn't make us better, doesn't make us anything else than other people. And we should not fear the people who live in this region. We should be working with them hand in hand and trying to solve the problems that the globe faces right now. Global warming, um, you know, promoting freedoms, promoting democracy, promoting ideas that help all of society grow. And, you know, sometimes there are going to be cultural clashes. And culture clashes don't mean we have to put down another culture. We have to understand other cultures, work with other cultures, and find ways forward for all peoples. Um, Again, I recognize that this topic is incredibly controversial. I know many of you may not even debate on this topic. Many of you will try to avoid the controversial issues on this topic, but many of you will steer right into the controversies. And all I hope is that when you do so, you do it with care and respect for all peoples involved in it, and that you do your reading, do your research, and that you make sure you are talking from an educated perspective and a perspective that is not exclusionary of any one person or peoples. With that, I thank you for listening. Good luck in your debates. Good luck in your research. And Happy New Year to all of you.